Welcome to Inside the CISO's Office. I'm the producer, Lance Hart. Today, we will be talking about strategies for mitigating cybersecurity threats. John, take it away.
Thanks, Lance. I appreciate it. And welcome to Inside the CISO's Office. My name is John Bruggeman. I'm one of the consulting CISOs for CBTS and Onyx. And we're here today with Robert Leong from HCL Software. And we're here to talk about cybersecurity, threats, vulnerabilities, and how you can mitigate them. Robert, please take a second and introduce yourself to the audience.
Well, thanks so much for the invitation and for the introduction, John. I'm basically your garden variety MIT nerd. So my background is in electrical engineering and computer science out of grad school at MIT, and I worked for years as a designer, chips, boards, writing firmware and software. But I wandered over into the software and into the security space. Gosh, how long has it been? Over 15 years ago now. I've been a cybersecurity professional, and I'm a product manager, which is just a fancy way of saying it's my job to figure out what's in the mind of the CISO and what should we be building to have impact on the unresolved problems that exist in the space. So it's like, hey, what do you tell hundreds of engineers what they should be building next, and explain to the business why we should solve that problem rather than another? So that's my job, and it's a lot of fun.
Well, that's great. And I know a lot of CISOs, both personally and in my interactions with them at CBTS and Onyx, that they've got some questions. And thankfully, the boards of directors are asking what I consider to be the right questions now. And I know you've done some research on this topic. And that's so right. As we look at the top board challenges, I know you've got a slide for us, so we'll pull that up as we're talking through this. Let's describe what you were able to find in your research for the top board challenges in the past year, 2024, and in the years ahead.
Sure. What we found was a little bit surprising because in years gone by, board of directors say that their biggest problems are digital innovation or what their strategy is for AI and so on and so forth. But this year, if you take a look at the screen, they surveyed 300 board directors. Diligent Institute does this every year. And oh, by the way, I'm very interested to see what the 2024 report looks like. But the top board challenges are in order. Number one, cybersecurity is the number one concern. Number two, digital innovation, including AI. And then number three is capital allocation. So the way that I read this was that they actually want to get to digital innovation, but cybersecurity causes friction and disruption, and they're not quite sure what to do about it, and it is the number one board challenge. So
which is very understandable.
Very, very surprised that this is now at the board level, and that the business folks who are running organizations now recognize that this is such a huge problem.
Well, and that is not a surprise, I think, to most practicing CISOs, and probably even from most practicing CIOs or CTOs, because as you said, cybersecurity can be a big disruptor. I did a presentation last week actually on AI risk, and there were 10 major ransomware data breach events in the first 6 months of 2024. So as you looked at your research, what was the situation for the current situation in cybersecurity from your perspective on the research that you did?
Well, thanks for asking, John, because I tried to do the audience a favor. And you know how you always get all these threat reports and threat intelligence, and then there's one from this group and that group. And I spent days and days and days and read hundreds of pages of this stuff. And what I've tried to do is summarize it, distill it, and then add a little analytics on the top. So I'm going to throw some statistics at you here fairly
And you
quickly.
can go to the next slide. Yep.
Yeah, there you go. So number one, and this hasn't been updated for 2024, but you can see in 2023, we spent $185 billion worldwide, and it was estimated to be somewhere in the neighborhood of 200 million going forward, rising to 271 billion. I read one study that said it'll be north of 300 billion. But what's shocking about this is that if you take a look at the cybercrime losses, it's orders of magnitude more. 9.22 trillion lost in 2024, projected to grow to 15.63 trillion. That's a T, it's not a typo, by 2029. So, and even with things like the recent breach of the Treasury Department, by what they believe is a Chinese APT, there are a bunch of people. I was just looking at stuff in the government, and there's a bunch of our legislative officials saying we're not spending enough money. We need to spend more money. But my view is that doing more of the same is not necessarily going to fix this problem. I don't think it will. We need to take a look at do we need to do things differently? And if so, where does it need to be done differently?
Just out of curiosity, in this statistic, and I'm not going to argue with the number, the 9.22 trillion for 2024, they had to, in that number, include operational expenses for recovery, not just theft of material. Because some people would challenge that number. I'm sure I can hear them in my head, and I can probably see them in the chats that'll be coming along that, oh, nobody's lost that much money. Well, you don't lose $9 trillion in cash, but your work and the effort to recover gets extrapolated into that $9.2 trillion figure.
Absolutely, it is. You're right that it is a amalgamation of lots and lots of different numbers, including recovery costs,
lost productivity, damage to the brand, and then the hard quantitative numbers such as how much revenue, how many customers did we lose, so on. So, but that's how you get this number to be so ginormous, is that you need to take into the totality the entire effect. So we hear sometimes various well-reputed and analysts will talk about total economic impact, and that's what they're looking at here. This is total economic impact. Some of us remember, because it really wasn't that long ago, we're coming up on the 1-year anniversary of the data breach at Change Healthcare, which had a tremendous impact. That was a ransomware attack that took probably the largest security exchange for doctors and patients and hospitals offline for weeks. And there were doctors' offices that were literally not getting paid because of a ransomware attack. And
that's right.
We could, that could be a whole separate, webinar if we wanted to do it, but let's continue on with your, the motives in cybersecurity. Yeah.
What I thought was interesting, and you touched right on it here, John, which is that the motive in cybersecurity breaches, for anyone who's been around for a while, these motives have actually changed over the last decade. When I first started tracking this, it wasn't financial motives weren't number one. It was actually theft of intellectual property, espionage, things like that.
Activism,
but now, activism, cyber activism. And so it's really changed a lot. And so you see that espionage is only 7% of the total. Financial motives are 92% of the total. And, there's lies, damned lies, and then there's, of course, statistics. I always like to put the sources down at the bottom. So if you want to refute this, or you believe that this is an incorrect interpretation, then you can go to the Verizon DBER report and pull it down and then say, I'm not reading it the same way. I always put the sources down there. The other thing that I thought was
sources. I like having sources.
Yes, absolutely. The other thing is that the most common external actors in public administration was organized crime in 2023. In second place, a significantly smaller second place, is nation state actors. And I've also in my career seen this flip around, and I'm sure you have as well, where it used to be the top hacking groups, whether it was communist China, North Korea, the Russians, those were the number one external actors, the big players, and it's flipped around. It's organized crime. Why are they doing this? Because they're making money doing this.
Billions and
billions. And what I also thought was fascinating was this graph. 1/3 of all breaches involved ransomware or extortionware of some sort. And when I first started tracking this 10 years ago, I first started tracking this when I was at Intel Security back when they bought McAfee. We estimated this in McAfee Labs to be 4 to 5% of breaches were monetized with ransomware, and it has grown to 33-ish%, 1 out of 3. top threat in 92% of industries. And, there's been lots of initiatives to try and stop it, but it just hasn't. It has really flourished. What I find particularly fascinating, John, is that you'll notice that there's now this big uptick on extortion. And people are like, well, what do you mean by extortion? Isn't ransomware extortion? Yes, ransomware is extortion, but people are realizing, the adversaries are realizing that the good guys, the defenders, have got pretty decent recovery mechanisms now.
We've figured out how to back up our sensitive data. So
we can back up That's right. So instead of encrypting it in situ, what they're doing now is, and I predicted this several years ago, they're going to realize that that's going to happen, and instead they're going to telemeter out sensitive intellectual property, whether it be
customer
lists
information,
of customers, or I was talking to a glue company not that long ago, and they said, well, what intellectual property do we have? And I said, didn't you just finish telling me that you have 50 PhD chemists on your payroll, and it took them the last 10 years to come up with your top 3 glue recipes? Well, they could just steal that.
Yes.
They could just pick it up and then hold it for ransom, or sell it to someone who can start a cheapo competitor for you, or put it on the black market. And I remember looking at the face of the CTO, and his jaw just dropped. And he hadn't thought about that.
Sometimes
they could just take
they
it
don't think about it.
Right, right. It's really shocking. What I also think is interesting, lest you think that the APTs aren't really a thing and it's just a bunch of organized crime, whatever, intelligence does show that 38 out of 143 APTs listed by MITRE were active during this time. What we haven't quite seen yet, but more than 40% of ransomware in wipers, and I think that the first widespread wiper was really WannaCry, because what's a wiper? It's just something where you pay the ransom, they don't give you the unlock key. Well, then
they tell you that you can recover all your data, but unbeknownst to you, the criminals lied. Shock.
They lied. Shocking. What I find fascinating, though, John, is that true ransomware folks, they will give you the key, and it will work. Because if you paid and you didn't get a working key, then their business model falls apart. So now wipers are a thing, and they're targeting the industrial sector, specifically the OT and the supply chain.
Yes.
What is also shocking to me, for anyone who's been following MITRE for the last 10-ish years, that they've dramatically expanded both their attack framework as well as the defend framework, but that even over a 6-month period, we have seen over 2/3 of the dozens of attack techniques on the network sensors. That's just stunning to me. They're using all the techniques. They're just out there spinning them up. It's amazing.
Well, and the other thing too, I think that people, when I talk to my customers and potential customers about it, they worry about ransomware and they worry about being attacked. They don't know how to stop it oftentimes. And I do let them know that your first line of defense is going to be your backups. And after that, then, you want to know where your crown jewels are and protect those with layers of defense to protect it as much as possible. So it's not many people that I've run into are aware of the MITRE attack framework, but that's probably more to do with, I'm talking to people that aren't in the security space as opposed to people that are in the security space.
Right. And the other thing is MITRE's been around for I think it's close to 70 years now. They've been around for quite a while, and they're doing a great job. I agree with you. A lot of people pay attention to, hey, can we have sensors that can detect all of these dozens and dozens of various techniques, whether, I'm pivoting or I'm escalating privileges or, whatever I'm doing. I like to go and say, listen, let's just pay attention to basic hygiene.
Please, let's start with basic hygiene. That's all I'm asking, really.
And one of the basic hygiene things is, well, how are they actually getting into the estate? And no giant surprise, the Verizon data breach investigation report talks about this every year. It's still the big 3: stolen credentials, phishing, and exploitable vulnerabilities. And what's amazing to me is that there are big chunks of this that can really be, that should be under your control.
The credential theft, I saw an article the other day that said the criminals are not breaking into your network, they're logging into your network with credentials that have been stolen.
That's right. That's right. And I've been thinking about this and say, okay, well, what would you do? Well, obviously, when you hear about a breach, you're going to want to look at, well, force everybody to change all their credentials.
Right.
Okay, that's the first thing that you should do, so that whatever they have with intellectual property with respect to stolen credentials, purchased credentials off the dark web are useless to them. And yet they don't do that. That's just basic hygiene.
It is basic
hygiene. And I know that in our previous chat, you were saying, I really want to press in on exploitable vulnerabilities, because that should be something that is completely under an organization's control.
Yes. Patching.
That's, I made a slide just for you, and here it is.
All right.
I said,
that looks appropriate.
Yeah, it has the clearest path to cyber risk control, because clearly, if you patched everything, if you patched all the CVEs that are extant in your system, it's not that you've made things, 50% better and you apply a patch. If there's a remote control exploitable vulnerability, and you, let's say it's in a Microsoft or an Oracle product, and you ran the Oracle or the Microsoft patch, it's not that it's 50% better, it's 60% better, it's 100% better. You've eliminated the programming mistake, because that's what it is, right? You've eliminated a mistake. So why isn't there a mantra of patch everything, patch it now? And so I double clicked into why the heck isn't everybody patching everything right now?
And you found that operation link that says, I don't trust patches. I'm afraid they're going to take my operation down. So no, I'm not going to patch.
Yes, actually, you're exactly right, John. We found a bunch of that, but part of it's trusting the patch and trusting the vendor, but some of it is also the number of CVEs and the number of patches.
Oh, yes.
So I looked at this, and actually my team constructed the last couple of years, so 23 and 24. We need to also do a guesstimate for 25. But take a look at this. 2019 was 11,207 new vulnerabilities identified that year, new CVEs that were issued by the vendors. Look at the expectation for 2024, 21,555, nearly double.
Year over year. I mean, the number is ridiculous. Yes.
And what I find fascinating, and I've asked a lot of audiences this, so I know we can't see everybody out there in the audience, but if you take a look at 2019 to 2020, looks like a step function, right? There's this huge step up. Anybody have a guess what happened? And
the old work from home.
Yes. Everybody gets the guess right. The bottom line is that vulnerabilities are essentially mistakes in coding, and that rapid changes in computing, that is remote work. We recoded everything. We rewrote a whole gob of stuff. And the bottom line is there were a lot of mistakes that were made. And now there's too many vulnerabilities, and the control paradigm that we had, which was essentially to say patch everything, is now completely broken. And oh, by the way, when I was doing my study, I'm like, is artificial intelligence going to make this better? So that's an interesting, before I show the next slide, I invite the audience to say, do you think AI is going to make this better?
Yeah. I would love to throw up that question and then have people fill in the blank and see what they want to do. So
yes, this would be a perfect place for audience interaction. But the bottom line is that I believe the answer is no.
I would agree 100% that it is not going to make things better.
It's not going to make things better. Look at this stuff. GitHub survey last year, 92% of developers are currently using AI coding tools, and the other 8% are being pressured to do it. But look at the other two survey results. Participants who had access to an AI assistant wrote significantly less secure code, and it had more bugs and it had more vulnerabilities. But the last box there on the bottom, participants with access to an AI assistant were more likely to believe they wrote more secure code than those without access.
Yeah.
And this is
disappointing.
It is disappointing to me. And we can. I had some very interesting discussions with my coworkers here, and I said, okay, we need to back the truck up and realize that even though it's called AI and artificial intelligence, it doesn't actually understand what it's doing. There is no grokking of what's
There's
happening.
no thinking involved.
There's no thinking involved. It is a statistical correlation of what is the best fit answer for whatever you're asking them. Okay, give me code that does XYZ, and it will go and do a statistical correlation of code that does XYZ, and it will give it to you, and it looks like it's thinking. But does it actually know what that code does? It does not.
No, of course not.
It has no comprehension of what it does. So even though I'm a big supporter of AI and I think it can be really mightily used, we need to realize that AI in the short term may make things a whole lot worse.
Well, yeah, in particular, it's all dependent on the data that it's trained on as well. And it's, if you have, and I've worried about this for people that heavily rely on, generative code systems. If you have a poison data model where I'm a threat actor and I'm like, oh, you're just, basically vacuuming up everything in GitHub, I'm going to plant some code in there that looks good and runs well, but also has this backdoor that you don't know anything about. And I'm going to name it really similar to this other library that 1 billion people are using. And now I have potentially a backdoor into heaven knows what code's being developed. And unless you vet your code, you just wrote some really vulnerable software that might be going into a production line. It's a big risk.
Right. It is a big risk. And what I wanted to know is, okay, we believe the paradigm's broken. How broken is it? So I dug into that as well. So I think most folks in the audience will know what the CISO known exploited vulnerabilities database is.
They might not, but that is one of the best things if you are on a lean budget. And let's say you're a small shop and you're the IT director and you have nobody running security, patch the known exploited vulnerabilities. Please sign up for their email, get their email, figure out if it's being exploited. And I saw a statistic the other day, I think it was from Roger Grimes at KnowBe4, the actual number of vulnerabilities versus the ones that are known to be exploited, 1.6% of the vulnerabilities out there are the ones that are exploited. 1.6%. It's a tiny fraction.
It is a tiny fraction. And you're right. So for those who don't know, CISA is essentially the U.S. government, administrative authority over the other agencies. So all the 3- and 4-letter agencies, they have to do what CISA tells them to do. CISA is Cybersecurity Infrastructure Security Agency. It's the U.S. government. But in order to be in the known exploited vulnerabilities database, you have to have 4 characteristics. 1, there's a CVSS score assigned that talks about the severity. 2, it has been exploited in the wild. Generally speaking, it's in the government's censor net. And since I used to work at McAfee, I'm very, very, very familiar with the censor net because we sold a lot of it to them. 3, it has remediation available, and it typically means that there's a vendor patch available. And then 4, which I think is particularly interesting, it has due dates for federal teams that must remediate, right?
Yeah.
And
there was one for Avanti that just came out, and the federal agencies have to be compliant with mitigating that vulnerability by tomorrow. I mean, it's crazy. So,
and that means that's how nasty that one is. And and so when you see something and it says you've got 4 or 5 weeks to remediate it versus you've got to remediate it tomorrow, that gives you a level of urgency, which I think a lot of other threat sources don't actually give you. So I totally agree with you. But here's the bad news. The good news is that we have the database. The bad news is that it takes approximately 55 days to remediate half of the CISA CVEs, and the enterprise patch cadence usually stabilizes about a month or 2 out, with 15 days for critical vulnerabilities. So if you are set up to remediate within 15 days, but the CISA says you need to remediate by tomorrow, you've got an order of magnitude plus problem in your ability to be responsive to what's actually in the catalog. So that's pretty bad. And to your point earlier, the median time for CISA CVEs to have the first scan in an internet honeypot is somewhere around 5 days, a little bit less than that. And for non-SysOCEV CVEs, it's 68 days. So to your point, John, people really, really, really need to pay attention to this. And then wait, I'm going to throw even more statistics at you. The percentage of all endpoint vulnerabilities targeted by all attacks remains steady at approximately 9%. But 41% of organizations detect activities for exploits that were announced less than 30 days ago. So,
Yeah, but
so they're
don't
happening
forget
really
the gifts
quickly.
that keep on giving. There are people
That's
that
right.
have vulnerabilities that have had patches out for 2 and 3 years. They get popped, and then wonder of wonders, how could this possibly have happened? We didn't know about this vulnerability, and you just want to slap your forehead and say, it's been a vulnerability since 2021. You knew about it.
That's right. That's right. So to your point, I pulled up some more statistics. Percentage of detected vulnerabilities unremediated after more than 1 year, 1 out of 3. It's just a massive number. And people who had breach where patch was available from the vendor but was never applied, 60%. So we're just really, really, really bad at patching. And we realize that we're bad at patching as well.
Yeah, we're bad at it. And I remember when I ran my own shop for 20 odd years, nobody on my team liked applying patches. It was kind of grunt work, and it wasn't sexy. It wasn't fun. And I'm like, guys, I know it's not sexy. I know it's not fun, but you got to do it. So,
That's right.
I would harp on them, and we were in that 30-day cadence. We would get that 30-day cadence, and we were a Microsoft shop, so it was easy, much easier to do that. Firmware, we weren't on 30 days by any stretch. Firmware was a less successful cadence. Let me put it that way.
So I won't read this slide other than to say that the public organizations realize that they're not very good at vulnerability remediation. But to your point, even though they're being honest, we really need to find a way of doing this. And so I actually was looking at, well, okay, we know that we're bad at it. We know that we're not patching. We know that it's not sexy and we should do it. Are there any other reasons? And so as a product management team, we went out and interviewed a whole bunch of people, and we asked them open-ended questions like, what are your biggest unresolved problems? And can you tell me where your issues lie? And one of the ones that we kept hearing was that there are now so many vulnerabilities ranked critical and important that they can't ID them and remediate them all without basically shutting down the business for an unacceptably long period of time.
Right.
And I'm like, okay.
Which is a legit point. It is a legitimate point.
It is. So it made me think of, let's call him a technology philosopher named Melvin Conway. And I heard Conway's Law years ago. I was searching for graphic representations of Conway's Law, if you guys aren't familiar with it. And I ran across this joke, right? And I thought it was funny, so I put it on
I think it's great. Yes, please go tell everybody about Conway's Law.
Conway's Law. Melvin Conway in the 60s posited that organizations which design systems are constrained to produce designs which are copies of the communication structures of their organizations. So let me say that again.
Yeah.
If you're an organization, you are constrained to design systems that create designs that are copies of your communication structures. And I thought this was funny, and it was kind of silly.
The Microsoft part of it is hilarious. Yes.
Yeah, it's like Microsoft divisions don't get along very well.
That's what I
heard. By the way, in case you were wondering, Oracle has a really, really big legal department, and you do not want to be audited at all by Oracle and their organization. So I looked at this, and it made me laugh out loud when I found it. I don't even know. I need to go back. There's like some Manu Cornet, I guess, is who wrote this. But I thought it was really funny because in every humor, there's an element of truth. And the element of truth here is that the way that we perceive their communication structures, yes, it does look like this. So I thought it was just kind of funny. But okay, well, let's apply this to ourselves. We are an organization. We are designing systems to defend ourselves. What do those organizations look like? And so something that I just did fairly recently, I was in Amsterdam, and there were a whole bunch of CISOs in front of me. And I said, how many of you have a network defense team? Hands went up. Endpoint, user endpoint defense teams, yes. Server security teams, hands go up. Cloud security teams. mobile security teams. And I said, okay, how often do these groups talk to each other or collaborate amongst each other? And I said, anybody? Do they do it on a quarterly basis, a yearly basis, a daily? Do they talk all the time?
You have a team meeting once a month?
Yeah. And one guy put his hand up and he says, they never talk to each other. I said, that's my point. We ourselves, as defenders, have created segregated groups, and these groups don't talk to each other, and that's part of the problem.
Yeah.
We also, since we were talking about vulnerabilities, we rely on categories of vulnerabilities, whether they're critical, important, and we bin them, we stratify them according to what the categories are, and we rely on lists. We rely on existence of things. We rely on existence of process, existence of technologies, and we believe that all of this together ensures some sort of security, but I would argue that it does not. And you and I chatted last time, so I'm sort of cheating, but we do see that all vulnerability assessment technologies typically have 3, sometimes 4 categories. They have proprietary methods of prioritizations, but what we also know, as reported by Gartner, that 33% of all CVEs in 2023 were categorized as critical or high,
which is way too big. Too big of a number.
To your point, only 9% of the CVEs were actually actively exploited throughout the entire year. The adversaries are just exploiting them more quickly.
Yes.
And they're also, what I'm also hearing from talking to practitioners, that once they actually have a breach and they do forensics and they tease it apart, they realize that adversaries are doing a mix and match of what would normally be categorized or stratified as medium and low priority CVEs to accomplish the exact same goals. So the adversary, I think I worded this a little awkwardly, but the adversarial priority is to achieve the objective, not how easy it is or whether we can use all important or critical CVEs.
Right.
We just want to get there. And that's the problem, because we as defenders are not thinking in this manner. We're thinking according to what we had on the previous slide. We have segregated groups, we have groups of defenders, so we're okay. That's not how the bad guys think at all. So they think in terms of objectives, in terms of how do you achieve, what's the path or the mechanism or the pattern for me to get to the objective. And if I can't get there through path A, what's my alternative path? And as long as they can get there, so if you're a hospital and the adversary is trying to lock up your EMR in order to hold you for ransom, because they know that's going to shut down all your operations, they don't care how they get to the EMR as long as they get there. And even if it takes days or weeks to get to the EMR, as long as they get to the EMR, they're okay with that. Yeah, so that's what we need to realize.
And if there's 2 people attacking, or even if it's a team of 20 people and it takes them 6 months, but they get $23 million, it's money and time well spent. Yeah, they don't get paid until the money crosses the finish line, so to speak, and the ransomware is paid. But imagine a lot of people would happily work for 6 months to get a share of $23 million.
Absolutely. Now, I did come up and when I was presenting some of this analysis to some CISOs, I got some very interesting feedback. And one of them was, Robert, are you saying that, for instance, CIS Control 7 is a bad control? And my answer is no, I'm not saying that at all. I'm saying that it's a great control, but it really should be considered phase 1. It's an incomplete control. And some of the underlying assumptions, presuppositional basis behind the control probably needs to be changed. Most compliance involves the existence of a security process or tooling. They also assume remediation down to either an insignificant or a 0 number of vulnerabilities. And what I'm saying is that model doesn't work. Correct. That model doesn't work, and you need to go beyond that model, and you need to start thinking like bad guys. That's what I'm saying. You need to have, and you can't just do this as a tabletop exercise once a year.
No,
you need to.
You have to change your mind. Yeah,
yes.
You have to change the paradigm that you're thinking about.
I'm going to pour one more glass of gasoline on the fire, and then I'll give a suggestion on what I think we should do.
I'll have Liz add a little graphic of fire erupting on your slide, but go on.
Okay. 88% of boards see cyber risk as a business problem. So this is the same thing that happened when financial problems were out of control, and we there was some finance goes, and and people got frog marched out. Cybersecurity is a social phenomena. Boards are well aware of it now. Everyone wants proof of value. So what are they doing? They're going to the executives, the business executives, and they're putting their hands around their neck and they're squeezing. That's what they're doing. So Microsoft, of all places, their EVP of security, Charlie Bell, this was just like, 6 months ago, 7 months ago? We will instill accountability by basing the compensation of the company's senior leadership team on our progress in meeting security plans and milestones. In other words, you're not going to get your bonus, you're not going to get your stock options unless you have this under control. And when I talk to CEOs and to line of business leaders, they're like, we don't know how. So that is one of the big problems that I think we as an industry have to fix. And if we're to bring it home and say, okay, so what's the 3 key pains? IT and security is overwhelmed. Security, IT, and the C-suite are misaligned, and that teams, tools, and processes are siloed and disjointed, as I mentioned. And so if that's the issue, and we say that you're overwhelmed, misaligned, and disjointed, I would argue that you need 3 counter strategies to this, which I call, and you can make fun of me because I like to make things rhymey to make them easier to remember: acceleration, collaboration, and consolidation.
I like it.
And what
the tongue. Yep.
Okay. And what I mean by this is acceleration is we need to find ways to increase the number of important cybersecurity things we can do without having to think about them. And if this sounds an awful lot like Alfred North Whitehead, and you've read him, that's because I copied it directly from one of his books.
We have to give credit. That's not a bad thing. Just don't claim it as your own.
I tried. This is not my own. I got this from reading Dr. Whitehead. We have to increase the number of important cybersecurity things we can do without thinking about them or expending manual effort in the same amount of time or less time as before. And we need to keep thinking in this terms, and I refer to that as acceleration. Collaboration is that we need to break down the silos that exist among security, IT, and the C-suite. So we need to find technologies and ways and processes to measure cyber risk and control the cybersecurity outcomes using business decisions, tooling, and processes. So when we hear about business people saying, I saw a vulnerability burn down chart, my team presented to me, but I don't know how to use business decisions to affect that chart, and I can't tell whether I'm getting better, I'm getting worse. We need to move beyond that. And then last but not least, we really need to look at consolidation of technologies, consolidation of processes and people. If you have groups of defenders and the defenders are not working together, the first thing you can do is get them to work together, get them to talk to each other. And then we can also have tools that help them as well. We need to think like adversaries. We need to think in unified patterns, unified paths. We need to find ways to unify the teams, tools, and the processes to defend the paths and the patterns. We need to break down the silos. If that sounds a little bit like collaboration, yes, but collaboration is like you're talking to other people. Consolidation means that you really need to bring teams together and have processes that work together and technologies that work together. And so to me, these are 3, it's not, hawking some new functionality, but it's strategic approaches that I believe that CISOs and C-suite members need to look at in order to actually improve the state of cybersecurity as we go forward.
So once again, Robert, this was a great presentation. I appreciate your time and the slides and the statistics. I'm a big fan of statistics, and I like seeing the details and the resources. I appreciate what you've done here, and I look forward to talking with you in the future. Everybody stay safe.
I'd love to do it again. Let's do it again, John. It'll be great.
Excellent. Sounds good. Thanks, and take care, everybody.